All right, good afternoon. It is Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. It's 4:02 p.m., and this is a policy committee meeting of West Bend Joint School District Number 1. Superintendent Wimmer, can you confirm this meeting was properly and timely posted?
Yes, it was.
Great, thank you. I'm pulling up our agenda now, and I believe the next item on our agenda then would be the Pledge of Allegiance. Why don't we stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, just for attendance purposes, John Donaldson, school board member, Chris Swigert, school board member, Superintendent Wimmer. Dr. Chad Temez has an excused absence tonight, so we are going to proceed in his absence. Superintendent Wimmer, why don't we go to the first discussion item then? That is 411.2 AR, Education of Homeless Children and Youths.
Correct. So we do have a policy in place, which is up to date. Jill Corbett oversees our homelessness, serves as a liaison to the state. In looking at their last audit, they recommended just supplementing that policy with an administrative rule. So she worked with them on that, so you see that before you. Administrative rule we can put into place right after we have a conversation and I inform the board. So we would recommend that that supplementary rule be put into place to accompany the policy.
Excellent. So really, the idea of the administrative rule is to kind of add more process or more description to the policy that already exists.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit more for a layperson instead of the policy. You know, if I am an unaccompanied youth, which is, you know, of a certain age and they don't have a parent, perhaps they're doubled up in another home kind of thing, or they're experiencing homelessness and they arrive with a parent. It's just navigating what is the process, how do you go to a school district, what rights do you have to remain in your school of origin is what that's called, and how we secure transportation, and that's supplemented by some federal funding. And so it's just going through what those different options are that we work with families on.
Great. So the recommendation is this is going to be added to the website, and then the board to be informed because it's not a policy change.
Correct.
Okay. John, any objections to that? Okay. Great. All right. Then we can proceed with our next discussion item, which is school attendance area 432.
So the next one we had previously discussed in March. You wanted me to mock up just a little bit more generalization because of the nuances of elementary, intermediate. We do offer interdistrict choice throughout the district, so it's just showing that all students are enrolled in their specific attendance area based on boundaries, so it generalizes that language. I moved the high school language, so it's not new, but it's moved, just putting how kids are assigned together. So everyone goes in their enrolled boundary area. High school, you have that opportunity to choose. And then, again, same language that you have the ability to interdistrict transfer. So you saw those. So again, these were items that we discussed at our last committee. You wanted to see before we brought them forward to the board. So again, that high school language is just moving that up, striking the intermediate, and just making it's globally, anyone is enrolled in the boundary. And the boundaries are designed and communicated by the district.
So these are more, dare I say, cosmetic changes than
Correct,
meaning
yeah.
changes, yeah. I had no issues with these changes. John, any thoughts?
Nope.
No? Okay.
I don't think so. No.
Okay. So then this would go in front of the board for consideration.
Correct.
All right. Very good.
Same with the last, the 453.9. This was also a discussion item at our March committee meeting. We talked about shifting that responsibility so that that authorization came from central office versus a principal. There's just different nuances, whether it's a student services with a student with a disability that we need to take into account for animals in the classrooms or on school premises, as well as different liabilities. So we've shifted that authority to central office. Teachers can approach their principal, whether it's a classroom pet. You know, oftentimes you'll see, you know, kind of that circle of life. A lot of classrooms will hatch chicks in spring. You know, you see a lot of monarch butterflies, so sometimes there might be an interim class pet. There might be visits from, you know, different organizations that are sanctioned to do, and then there's certainly service animals, but it also covers anyone on premises as well. So we just cleaned up that and provided definitions of what those different functions were, as well as that line of authority. And then the accompanying administrative rule, again, a little bit more granular detail on how that's exactly executed is in there. Again, shifting that responsibility, making sure that the teacher requests permission from that principal, who in turn seeks it from central office. Once that's in place, our obligation to notify that was added. And then we added the pieces around service animals, so we weren't going to separate documents. So we're cleaning up that permission, keeping the foundation, and then adding a little bit more detail around service animals. Especially then in that policy around our expectations around certification, keeping up with, its vaccinations, that the handler, the child is considered the handler, it's under the control of, and our authority for removal or revocation if there are concerns around that, but making sure that there's access. So that's just giving a little bit more meat to that process piece and outlining our authority, and again, shifting that from the site to central office.
So I saw in the administrative rule, and you talked about it, the appropriate ways or reasons that, for instance, a service animal, if that request were to be withdrawn, do we, and maybe I missed it, do we have similar wording for forgetting about service animals or even emotional support animals, but the ability to say, you know what, we granted this, but there should be broad discretion on
sure.
the district's part to withdraw that if necessary?
Yeah, more general. Yeah, I certainly can put that up in the top. Not only you can grant the authority for, but you can revoke it
Can be
at any
revoked,
time.
right?
Yep.
Not that it's a one-way, that once it's done, it's irrevocable. It's because we know
I'll add that so that it's really clear in both the policy as well as the AR.
that'd be great. And
Okay.
it very, very well may be in here and I missed it, but just wanted to be sure that, there's appropriate consideration here for granting, but we should have broad authority, to remove, because we're not exactly sure what situation may arise.
And we have some pieces in there around requesting. So a lot of times you'll see animals in training and people maybe coming to an event and just how to make that request in general. So let's say you're a community member, you're going to something that's hosted by us, like the musical, and you are training a service dog. So our staff and our students don't have the ability to bring in an animal under training, under those during their workday, during the school day. But let's say a community member who happens to be at a school-sponsored event would like to make that request. There's some kind of clarity around that, or our authority to ask for those things. Because it's pretty easy to go on the internet and find, a vest or something to put on. So we just want to make sure that those are appropriately vetted, and that liability is really clear. So if I just double check and make sure in both the policy and the AR, it's very clear that we retain the authority to revoke, could I bring that forward to the full board?
I'd be comfortable with that, John?
Yeah, I would.
Great.
Yeah, I think we still got to maintain the ability to, if an animal is becoming a nuisance or something, then we
Right.
don't want to just continue to let it just because it's a service animal. Because like you said, you can get a vest pretty easy.
Yeah, we want to make sure those are legitimate.
Yeah, and the AR does talk about service animals, and it can be revoked for following reasons, and I think that's good. I just wanted to be sure, too, when I look at the policy, I think it's the third paragraph saying, prior approval must be received from the director of student services. Before they're brought into school, it'll be planned and approved in accordance, just to make sure we have a wind-up. That also can be withdrawn at broad discretion if necessary.
Now, I mean, obviously, we have the authority to grant, access for the animal if you deem necessary, if the district does. But, I mean, so let's say somebody has a disability, but I mean, some of these service animals aren't easy to come by. They're not cheap. They're expensive. If for some reason somebody falls outside of a threshold where they would need it, but, other people think they need it, you know what I'm saying? There might be like a gray zone of where, okay, you're on the border of you might need a service animal, but you probably could get away without it, and they're having a hard time getting through. I mean, we would still possibly grant an
So-
animal if it's trained and.
Yep, so,
I mean,
we don't have anything to do with the placement of the animal or anything like that. So let's say we have, to your point, we have a family, we think that might be a really good pathway for a child. And again, with that kind of level of expertise or knowledge. Anytime you're dealing with that through an IEP process, a formal process, individualized education program for students with disabilities, or a 504 plan. So that's a whole team. And we'd have that opportunity to then engage the family in, hey, we think maybe down the road you should think about. And this would be a good opportunity. And we can connect them with the organizations that help get them on the list, sponsored, all of those pieces, and start that. So oftentimes, you're right, we're sitting at the table saying, hey, this might be good, but helping them. But we don't provide the animal per se, we don't provide any of those things, but we help serve, to your point, John, as the liaison to help a family get connected to make that happen if we think that that would be a benefit.
John, I think I heard maybe as an element to your question, correct me if I'm wrong, if maybe if a student would benefit from a true service animal, often there's a physician that might be involved or something of the sort. But John, I think maybe you were talking about, well, what if you have someone who is close to qualifying for a service animal, not necessarily. We talk about the concept of the emotional support animal, for instance. So is that kind of
So
the,
we
the
would help
category
them.
that
So,
might
yep.
fall into?
So let's say that they, so you see this a lot, mostly in anxiety, but then we would work with that family and just say that level of anxiety is to the point where it's impeding. We think your child may qualify for a 504 plan, which would say that their medical condition is impeding their daily life, all of that. That team can help them and create that avenue if it doesn't, you know, to your point, John, already exist. So we can help find that. So it becomes, like you said, it comes outside of the realm of just emotional support, and that it's truly there's an emotional piece to their disability that may be a benefit. So we help get that lane open to them as well.
So there's a pathway. Maybe it's not
Correct.
necessarily as broad as a true, I'm going to say true service animal, but there's a pathway.
Correct.
Okay,
Good question. So.
right.
Because oftentimes, a family is navigating a child with a disability. It may be the first time they're experiencing that in their lives. And to your point, the expertise of a team and some of those experiences is helpful. So those are often team approaches, team conversations.
Well, great, and I think I heard that with the addition of, let's just make sure we have, in the appropriate circumstances, the right to withdraw.
Yep.
I think we thought it would be fine then to advance that to the board for consideration.
Then I shall do so.
Okay. It takes us next to the 860, visitors to the schools and discussion regarding volunteers.
Sure. So we have 860 on the books right now regarding visitors. It just broadly mentions volunteers, but those are different. So before you, I have draft new policy language utilizing WASB and some resources around that nuances of volunteers. So right now, volunteers are vetted, and this language supports that. They're vetted with a background check. They have different levels of authority as a visitor, as a volunteer, those kinds of things. So right now, we disqualify anyone who wants to volunteer in our schools, anyone who's convicted with a felony, any misdemeanor in the last 10 years that they didn't disclose from them, because they're not being genuine on their application process. So if they fail to disclose something, and any misdemeanor that's aggressive in nature or is a crime against a child. So battery, strangulation, drug dealing, disorderly conduct, that's related to domestic abuse or within the home, endangering safety, use of dangerous weapons, child sexual assault, neglect, or abuse. Those are all grounds in our current piece that we turn away volunteers. So the policy language doesn't specifically state all of those because you don't want to box in, because what if I come across some new type of crime, so we don't box, but those are our practices. So you see draft policy language that lays out our ability and our authority, to your point, to accept or deny volunteers, what they are and aren't allowed to do, so much, and then there's an additional AR for consideration that kind of spells that out a little bit more on how we do that. So Lenny Hansen, our director of HR, as well as his team, oversees background checks and all of those pieces and reviewing those applications. He and I worked on this language together.
Great, and
And there have been questions. There have been questions from, people with prior felonies who are seeking to come into our schools, and we've held that line on no. So if the board feels differently,
Well, maybe we can walk through some, we have like walking through some hypotheticals. So let's say we have a parent, and the parent has been found guilty of a felony. And so I see here, as it relates to volunteers, that that parent would not be a candidate for volunteer activity to
Correct.
lead others. But let's say, that parent wants to attend a student-teacher conference. So what happens there?
absolutely. So that's the nuance of creating language specifically about volunteers. Volunteers are a different level. They're not visitors, and they're not the parent participating in the child's education. So certainly, parents, guardians can come in and be part of those conferences, those pieces. The only other discrete thing on visitors, if anyone is a registered sex offender in any way, where there has to be a very specific plan around that. They would never be allowed to volunteer in any way, but there might be some rights that they retain as parents or guardians. That would be a separate plan. But you're correct. That doesn't bar them from visiting or participating in their child's education. And then sometimes there's layers of control depending on what maybe a prior offense was, but we certainly work through that. But this is volunteers. So it may be, I'm a volunteer on a field trip and we're broken off into groups, and you are solely responsible for overseeing a group of 5 kids as you walk through the zoo. So it might be that kind of thing. It could be I'm volunteering in the classroom consistently doing these pieces, even under the supervision of a teacher, but it's a different range.
I think that's a reasonable line to draw. John, I don't know if you agree, disagree.
I agree. I mean, you start getting so granular with it, I think it becomes hard to determine, who's eligible to volunteer and not. I think you just cut it off at the felony seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Then I
Okay, good.
would advance this for discussion with the full board so that they can review it as well.
Great.
Excellent.
Does that take us to the next agenda item,
Yep.
the 500 series review?
Correct. In the 500, this is going to be an easy one. That's why I said we'll most likely have an efficient meeting tonight. So recall that we had cleaned up policy quite a bit, brought a lot of things up to date, and we just wanted to put series on for timed review so that we are kind of in a continuous cycle of renewal and refreshing those pieces. All the policies that are listed are up to date. There are no recommendations for change in them. We reviewed also kind of what's in the field, what's evolving, consulted with our lawyers as well as WASB to see if there was any updates or recommendations. There are none legally either. So we have no recommendations unless the committee would like us to explore something further. All of our policies are up to date.
No, I guess what I would ask is, and you've already talked about it, the process. So this isn't a matter of we put these on the shelves and on a shelf and then don't pull it off for another year. You talked about attorney review, you talked about WASB review. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about that, just generally, even with regard to the policies.
Yep. And then what we would do, so setting that cycle of renewal, what I would do, we close out with the 400s right above us. We close out, we had done the whole 400 series review, and these were the ones that we had pushed at. We put some forward for some action, and then we had some of these that the committee still wanted to do some work. So then I'd bring forward to the board that we've completed our review, cyclical review of the 400 and 500 series, bringing it forward. Then we would update the date that it was reviewed formally so that, again, we can always pull those lists and look at and make sure that we've attended to it. So I would do that as well.
So I'd say I don't have a recommendation for update. At the same time, there's nothing stopping us, right, as either board members or policy committee
Correct.
members taking a look, saying, hey, I want to bring something forward, even off cycle.
Yep, so what I'll do, you can absolutely bring something forward off cycle, and things do, a law might change that we do that. So we might pull meetings, interim meetings aside from the quarterly ones. But what I would do then is bring the 400 and 500 series that we've completed our review on forward to the full board. Because again, that gives them the opportunity as well to know that our committee's doing its work, that we have no recommendations, but they might have questions around different areas, something for us to consider as well. So I'll bring the 400 and 500 series forward to that group too and explain that process.
All right. You okay, John, with that?
Yeah, yeah. I was just kind of reviewing some of these. see
Sure.
if there was any
Yeah.
tweaks.
Well, and
The
that's.
biggest update we just made was, recall we did some pieces around nepotism that were specific to staff. That was the last updated policy in this series for us.
Yeah, and I do know a lot of this stuff is backed by state statute.
Correct. Yeah,
so a
these are
lot
the
of these-
personnel ones, so to your point, they're not only there, but then they're also many replicated in our handbook and require review by employees annually too.
Right.
And again, if we see something, there's nothing stopping us from bringing something up, even if it is
Absolutely.
off-cycle.
So I'd say these are ready in those series to alert the full board that we've completed our review, and that's the status. Again, they could review and ask us to take a look at something as well.
Okay, great. All right, well then let's move to the next item, which is a follow-up really from prior board meeting around defining sexual content.
Yeah, so as part of the conversation, so there's two pieces. It's one, defining what that is, and the board's certainly engaged in setting what the threshold is. But when it got into kind of the conversation around the definition, I had proposed that we look at that a little bit more. So we could just lend a hand if we had any recommendations. So the current definition is listed there. Sexual content includes explicit detailed descriptions of sex acts. That's what we functioned under for the year. And through committee, kind of like, hey, these are the things we're coming up against. Here's where it needs clarity, that kind of piece. I know during public comments, some people mentioned Menominee Falls. The recommended definition that you saw brought forward actually used some of their language because we had been monitoring their work as well. So it's nice to kind of work with others, if you will. So you can see that broadened definition. Then during the discussion with the board, John had brought up the state statute intersection. So I put that language there in case there was anything we felt we needed to recommend in there, as well as the Federal Communications Commission. I put that in there as well, because we've always talked about kind of the TV ratings and how those are easily understood. So I just have that language in there. If we have, after our review, any recommendation for the full board in our recommended definition, like, oh, you know what, we read these items too, and we think maybe clarity here or add this here in the definition. Again, we're not setting the threshold, we're just helping them to define, if you will, and again, for full board review.
Well, John, I know, well, all board members have given this a lot of thought. I know you've given this a lot of thought too, and I appreciate you putting in the statutory, the 94811. And John, I know that you've talked about that. Are there elements in there that, tell me what your thought process is around this, because we've got the current definition, which is quite compact.
Yeah, it's too
compact.
compact for us.
Yeah, it's compact.
Yeah.
And I know that was just the, let's set something so we
Right.
have something to base off of.
Yep.
And I
Agreed.
get that, like you've said before, an iterative process. But I do think the recommended definition is a bit short.
Okay.
Just because I don't think it's descriptive enough of what we should define as harmful, you know. Honestly, I don't know why we can't just use the state statute. I
ahead.
think it explains, you know, a lot of scenarios, pretty much any that you would be looking for, to be defined, and I think, you know, that would be the best definition I can see.
So I'd be using that part kind of AG, right? And saying any explicit detailed description or narrative account of sexual excitement, sexually explicit conduct, sadomasochistic abuse, physical torture, brutality that taken as a whole is harmful to children.
And maybe some of AR, perhaps?
Yes, I would agree. I would
And then the
say-
harmful material.
Yeah, because I think it all goes together, you know, somebody could say, oh, well, but it's just a picture. Oh,
Okay.
okay, well, that's still harmful material. Yeah, I mean, and then it goes on to any book, pamphlet, magazine, print material, so then it breaks it down further as to what they would describe as, you know, inappropriate
Yeah.
material to be given.
So that's where it's found. I'm just highlighting some pieces in my notes. So the pieces AG and AR that give some. Then there's a 3D that talks about nudity. That piece. And then there's sexual excitement, the 3F.
Let's see. Yes. And I was
Person,
looking-
I don't think I need to define. That's the only other
Right.
definition piece, but.
Yeah, I think down to F is,
Nudity, let's have a conversation about nudity for a second.
Kind of an odd
I
thing to
know,
come
like
up in
the
a
things
policy.
we get
Why
to
not?
do in our day.
Why not?
that seems like it'd be pretty self-explanatory.
Sure.
You think that. However, then I'm going to run into art classes or art books or ancient Roman or Greek statues and those kinds of pieces. So let's talk about what that means and what we don't intend it to mean.
Well, and again, this is book club. Recommendations, correct?
Yep.
So we
can
are.
define that.
We are in, in all reality, limiting the book club selections or the selections
Correct.
for, because obviously there is state statutes around libraries and we have not much say
Not-
over
yep.
that.
So in book clubs, so yep, we're gonna make it really tight. We're gonna talk about it being nudity in book clubs. So let's say a graphic novel. I'm not gonna have introduce a graphic novel that has these images in it, right? Because you could have a graphic novel or illustrations within those offerings that include these pieces, right?
Yeah, because I think, I have to look at this a little bit more closely, but that definition of nudity, I'm assuming is intended, when looking in this criminal statute, around things like pictures, as opposed to words,
Correct.
right? That,
Which is fine, yeah.
right, and so it sounds like, again, to John's point, and I think to your response, that, yes, that would mean for book club, for instance, we would not have anything
Yep.
that has pictures that look like this.
Right. So then I'm going to pull those pieces and talk about that. I'm just highlighting those in my notes. Those, so I think I've got those pieces. We've talked about those. So what I can do is kind of go back with that team and talk about how maybe giving a
Sit.
little bit more detail around that. So maybe we give our, like you said, our kind of concise global, and then we give a couple points underneath that include elements from here that
Yeah.
almost lead you towards like, here's the general and here's
Yep.
what it means
Here's the
specifically.
expanded definitions.
Gives you
Yes.
a little more specific.
Right, and that's kind of how the state statute is laid out. I
Yep.
mean, here it says definitions in the section, this is
E- e-
this,
yeah.
this is this, this is this.
Okay.
And this is kind of what we're explaining. And curriculum is still going over the same thing, correct?
Correct.
So they're going to have a
yep,
second say
So
on
we're
some of
gonna,
this?
yep, we're gonna bring this definition straight to the board.
Okay.
So, because we were engaged in conversation, so at a future board meeting, we can continue our discussion and say, hey, we met, here were our findings, and here's some suggestions on this. They were coming to the table with some more examples of that, so the board could see like, oh,
all
we do or
tested.
don't mean that, yeah. some
Tested in action,
tests.
just to make sure that it's not, well, that's not what we meant.
Exactly, so
Okay,
when you
well,
get to
then we
the
need.
threshold part, can you take a look too now at the Federal Communications Commission definition and see if there's any pieces of that you would like me to fold in?
Well, that's the Supreme Court three-prong test.
Yep.
Where is that?
That
It
is-
has elements of the state statute in it.
Yeah, keep going way to the top, even further, right?
Oh, this one.
It's in the narrative, sorry.
You can see like some of the same wording in those pieces. Is there anything that you want me to carry forward? I think in our opener on the work, we talk about it having literary, artistic, political value. You know, we've got that in the opener.
I was just going to say, let's talk about that, because really, regardless of whether, if there was material, whether it contains obscenity or whatever or not, if it is material that lacks serious literary, artistic, political,
never
science,
came out
it
of
should never
there.
even come out, right?
Exactly.
So,
So we've got that in kind of the opener of it, and then we were looking at those three definitions. We've got graphic violence, this is the sexual content one. So I don't need to
Right.
restate that there. I just need to get into the detail on sexual content.
the statute is more definitive.
Yes.
And I want your.
Exactly.
I mean, it's so, because,
Federally, I think I think federally, they leave it a little looser than they can, because you're not allowed to go less of a rule at a state level than the federal level. You can go more, but you know, that I think it looks like to me they were leaving it open a little bit for states to be able to define
Interpret,
some of
yeah.
those themselves.
That it's a kind of
I
a
agree.
floor basic standard. Yeah, and nothing against the Supreme Court's definition, but when it says, first of all, it must appeal to an average person's prurient
Yeah,
interest.
I can't set that bar. I don't know
Yeah,
what that is.
that's tough. So I think it's deserving of us saying, no, we can put more words around that.
Okay.
And I'm going to get, I believe that what we talked about here as it relates to the state statute
I
probably
think that's a good
covers
path.
that.
Yeah, I think that's a good
So-
path. I think, again, it's not adding anything in clarity
Mm-hmm.
to the work, which is what they're seeking. So
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. So I've got those pieces that we've talked about highlighted. So what I'm going to do is then I'll bring that back as a board discussion item, and I'll say our committee met. We went through that statute. We went through FCC. We went through what you've got proposed, and here's some recommendations for consideration when we try and give clarity to that definition, and let the board continue that discussion. And I'll just kind of put those points that we talked about, I'll pull those out and kind of put those in sentences to accompany that definition.
Yeah, I think it's worth it to see what it looks like when we
yeah.
take the, I'm going to say the scraps, but the different elements that are
And-
kind of scattered throughout and pull it
knowing
together
that,
as a definition.
yeah, knowing that the full board needs to look at that anyway, I'm comfortable with kind of bringing that draft forward, showing them this whole language, and then just saying, hey, here's what we called out. And then opening that floor for a full discussion. So it's not held up in committee, our committee's helping with the process.
Right, and to that end, I have no problem with this going back to the board.
Mm-hmm.
Would we normally have said, let's toss this over to curriculum to see if this fits the piece? But I think your point is, we've already talked about this at the
We
board.
did.
We may as well complete that discussion. and-
Correct,
okay.
correct. And then I'm going back and working with curriculum on this, so.
Okay.
Again, we're not working in isolation.
Okay.
On these pieces, we're just working together to keep advancing.
Sure.
That piece, to your point, so.
Sure. No, my point was, if curriculum would look at it and say, wow, there's one wording that's just not going to work, we'll find out about that,
We'll
whether it's
talk
at the
about
board
it.
or not. Okay.
Yep,
All right.
we'll talk about that. We're not bringing it forward for action. We're not bringing it forward, we're bringing it forward for discussion.
Continued
Our
discussion.
committee reviewed this based on our last conversation. Here's what we're thinking. What do you think?
Okay.
So again, no immediate action in an upcoming agenda, just continuing the discussion would be our recommendation. So I feel very comfortable with that.
Okay.
Okay?
John, we're willing to give it a try?
Yep.
Great.
I think that's good.
Okay. Next then on our agenda is reviewing policy committee meeting dates, and you've outlined them here. We talked about our past practice is meeting on Tuesdays.
4
and-
p.m.?
Yep, and offsetting, so we're looking at August 6, November 26, February 25, May 6. I'm just going to check my calendar. I think I looked at this, and
Yeah, and I'll
Bear
certainly,
with, I'll
in
just take a
Dr.
quick peek.
Temez's absence, I'll confirm. Again, when we had initially discussed, when you were determining who was on which committees, those dates
Yeah.
had still worked. But again, I can do that double check. And then I'm just putting in there, if there's a conflict with one of those noted dates, I'm giving you what days of the week are available
Sure.
in there. Because again, that puts you solidly, so you're not doing 2 meetings in 1 week, and it offsets the ability for the curriculum committee to meet as well.
at
And
first-
it gives us, again, that, to your point before, it gives us a standing quarterly meeting. However, at any time, we can convene the committee, get that on the calendar and communicate that, if we need to respond to something.
Great. At first glance, they look fine. It sounds like
Mm-hmm.
you need to check with Dr. Temez, and John will take his homework
Yep.
to double check this and get back to you within a
Yeah.
week.
And, yep, and what we can do is we certainly foreshadow our upcoming meetings during our regular board meetings, and then we encourage people to consistently check our website, and those other pieces, because as soon as they're confirmed, we post them there.
Sure.
So that's the most up-to-date piece, but, yeah, once I have that confirmation, I'll fold that into the policy committee report.
Great.
So that everyone's aware that we're moving forward with those.
Great.
Great.
All right. Okay, with the conclusion of that item for policy committee meeting dates, unless there's any other discussion, we're set to adjourn. With that, we'll look forward to the homework that we talked about here and seeing that next.
So you'll see on that next agenda, I'm going to bring forward the 400 series, the 500 series, call out the specific changes, and then you'll see a discussion item regarding sexual content and our recommendations as a committee.
Okay,
Lots of work in a short amount of time. We're
short
very
amount of time. All right. John, any objections to adjourning?
None.
All right, then